Good evening. Thank you for coming. We're delighted that you're here and look forward to a good evening together. I always like to ask how many are here for the first time, if you would raise your hands. A few, not too many. So we got some return customers. That's good. There are a few upcoming events that I would like to make note of. In particular, on your table, you'll see a bookmark that has, this is the second in our series this year on faith and loss, and you'll see the other events coming up. Lucy Kalanithi, we had originally booked it for the Art Museum on December 8, but we've had such a big response. That can only seat 250 people, and we already have, even though we're 2 months away, over 260 people that have registered for it. So we've moved it to the Church on the Drive. It's on Edgewater, and so you'll find that information on the website. And it's important, given the response we've had to these events, that you do the RSVP, because that will ensure that you have a spot there in the upcoming events. So Lucy Kalanithi, if you haven't read the book written by her husband, When Breath Becomes Air, it's a very powerful book. It's been on the New York Times bestseller list. And it's a story of his own journaling of the last years of his life, dying of lung cancer while he was working on the medical staff at Stanford. His wife wrote the epilogue, and she'll be the one speaking to us. The play, Blackberry Winter, is the story of Alzheimer's. It's a one-person play. And the RSVP is very important for that because we've reserved a certain number of tickets, limited number of tickets, on each of the 3 nights that you see here. And so what we will do is that as you get the RSVP off the website, we will be there. We'll exchange that for your ticket that evening. And so I think that you will enjoy that particular presentation as well. We will have a member of our faculty that will be there at the end of the play. Those 3 nights, it's actually on has a longer run than the 3 nights we've booked it for. But the 3 nights that we have here, our faculty member will help and do a debrief and a Q&A kind of after the play to deal with some of the issues, questions that might come up from that. And then we have Philip Yancey coming in April, and a well-known Christian author. Again, the RSVP is important, I believe. We've already, even though it's months and months away, we already have over 60 people that are already registered for that particular event. So please keep that in mind as you look at your calendar, and you'll see the website there at the bottom of the bookmark. Right here at this facility, at the Florida Hospital Church this weekend, if you've ever heard Dr. Tony Campolo, professor of sociology at Eastern University and a well-known Christian speaker, very challenging individual in his work in the third world and with the poor, he will be speaking here this coming weekend, and there is a flyer on your table for that. And he will be joined in the afternoon by Dr. Steve Brown for a dialogue about some current issues and so forth called Friends and Theologians Debate with Grace. So it might be quite an interesting thing. And so the church invites you to come to that as well. Our theme this year, as I said, is faith and loss. And so we're trying to look at it from a variety of perspectives. And then our speaker will speak, I think, directly to that. But I wanted to let you know, especially for those who haven't been here before, we invite people to speak who've written. And we will have a book signing afterwards. And there are some of the books that he has written available as well. The one in particular that we've used to sort of showcase is Nasara, Dispatches from a District Hospital in Chad. And he's self-published, actually, but he's written a number of books, and one that from his experience working with Muslims Children of the East, the Spiritual Heritage of Islam and the Bible. We have several copies of that available as well this evening. Following his talk, there will be a Q&A. Dr. Stan Tobias, who's the chair of our Health and Biomedical Sciences Department at the university, is going to lead our Q&A period, and we have mics on either side. And so if you have questions, you want to make note of that so that you can get some of your questions answered as well. So Dr. James Appel, I think he's even got family here, has roots in Florida and I think elsewhere as well. He is a graduate with a degree in theology from Southern Adventist University. He said it took him a while to figure out what he wanted to be, but he doesn't regret having gotten a degree in theology. He went on to medical school and did a residency, I believe, in family medicine. And if you read his book, Nasara, you'll see that he does an awful lot of surgery for a guy that's a family doc. And I pictured him as he would have a textbook open while he was doing surgery sometimes, it almost seemed like. We'll just sort of let that go. I don't know how well that would work here at Florida Hospital, but nonetheless, it worked for you, right? That's all that mattered. He is currently helping develop some medical institutions in the country of Chad for the Adventist Church, and is a project director for a facility that's being built, as well as working with a surgical center. He lives in the capital city at the present time, but I think probably when those projects are done, he'll be moving and directing that as well. He and his family have been in Chad for almost 13 years now, and so I'm sure there's the sense in which it feels like home. So we welcome you to our colloquium, and we're glad you're here, and the time is yours.
For the first 28 years of my life, I had no idea what loss meant. I lived a pretty privileged upbringing, middle-class American life. And then on 8 days before September 11, 2001, I was driving down from Northern California with my brother and our girlfriends in a car. And there was the holiday traffic. Everyone was coming back from the long holiday weekend. And it was about 11 o'clock at night, and we were going pretty fast in the fast lane. There's 5 lanes of traffic, Los Angeles traffic, coming down over what's called the Grapevine into Southern California. It's a big hill. And there was cars just stacked next to us. And I'd kind of fallen asleep in the back seat, and I had laid my head on my girlfriend's lap when suddenly I felt the car swerving. And I woke up and looked in between the 2 front seats and saw the car veering from side to side, and that was right before we rolled at about 75 miles an hour. And I remember, I didn't have my seatbelt on, so I remember floating to the top of the ceiling of the car and hearing a voice saying, "Just relax, you're gonna be okay." So what seemed like a split second later, I must have lost consciousness. I found myself with my head at my brother's feet. He was in the passenger seat, and my body stretched across the middle console. And as I woke up, there was someone opening up the back door saying, "We gotta get him out." And I looked up at my brother, and he was lying back, completely peaceful. And so instantly, I was in my second year of residency. Instantly, my medical training kicked in. I got him into stabilizing his C-spine and helped to get him out, started doing chest compressions and CPR. But when I saw the pool of blood collecting around his head, I knew that there was no good continuing. So suddenly, I went from not knowing anything about loss to losing my twin brother, who was probably my only friend, and definitely my closest person to me. And, you know, I went through, of course, obviously a lot of grief. People were very generous. We had the memorial services, but I'm not sure I really had a chance to really think about a lot of things because I was in the middle of residency and that was calling, and I think in a way that was good for me. It gave me some reason to get up in the morning and to go back to work and have something that kept my life from just spinning completely out of control. And so I finished up my residency, grieving, but I'm not so sure about evaluating what that loss meant to me. And then getting prepared to go to Africa, because I'd signed up with Loma Linda University in what's called the Deferred Mission Appointee Program, where they give you a loan repayment option of working in one of their hospitals in the developing world. And so I was packing my bags by the end of 2003 to go to the Republic of Chad. And I got there and found myself the only doctor in a small hospital, so again, very busy, not much time to do much, but I did have time to start to develop a relationship. There was a volunteer nurse from Denmark with curly red hair, and it did not take me long to figure out that this is the girl, this is the woman I wanted to spend my life with. So by the end of 2004, we got married, and then we moved back to Chad and continued our work there. And after about a couple years, we both decided, hey, we'd like to start having children. Well, it turned out that that was easier said than done. And after about 5 years, then we decided maybe we should seek some help. And so we went back to Denmark, where we saw a specialist, started doing in vitro fertilization treatments. First couple treatments didn't work. And then finally, in 2009, Sarah got pregnant. And we came back to Chad, and we were following the pregnancy closely. I had an ultrasound, so almost every couple of days I was doing ultrasounds and watching the baby develop and feeling the baby kick, and got to be about 21 weeks. And, you know, you can look back, of course, and imagine all kinds of things, what ifs, what ifs, what ifs, but it was a very stressful week, and Sarah's horse got stolen, and then we found it again and had to drive out to another town about 60 kilometers away and actually ride the horse back, because there was no way to even know horse trailer. So we kind of split it up. I rode the first half, and then she came the next morning and rode the horse the rest of the way back. And then she got malaria. And at the end of this week, her bag of water broke. And at first, we tried to stay hopeful. I started pulling out my OB books, refreshing my memory. What is this? Oh, yeah, if there's a pocket, it's 2 centimeters, it'll be okay. And we got our hopes up, and there was no contractions. Maybe it'll be all right. Baby's heartbeat was still good, still moving around. Then contractions would start, then they would stop. And we were just back and forth for all weekend long. It started on Friday night, and then by Sunday, finally the inevitable happened. And there in my bedroom there in Chad, I delivered a perfectly formed little girl that sat just in the palm of my hand. And she was alive when she came out, but obviously her lungs were not developed. There's no way she was going to breathe. And so I sat and watched her very shortly give up that life. And the only thing we had to bury her in was an old mayonnaise jar. So I put her in this mayonnaise jar, dug a hole in front of our house, and buried her. So that was pretty traumatic. And we'd been trying for so long and so hard, and what are we going to do? Well, of course, Sarah, she wanted to get pregnant again as soon as possible. So she went back to Denmark, where we had some embryos in the freezer. And at the end of 2010, I got a text from her in, I think it was November, saying, hey, I'm pregnant with twins. And a little boy and a little girl. So we were already up for a furlough, plus we were in the process of leaving at the end of 2010 to go to a new place in Mundu to open up a new surgery center. We'd been in the same hospital for 7 years. It was time for a change. Some new doctors had come. So we said, this is perfect time. Let's just take an extended leave. If you're pregnant with twins, let's just make sure this one goes right. So we went back to Ventura County, where I'd done my residency. One of my colleagues who'd done the OB fellowship became her doctor and had an uncomplicated pregnancy. And she had a little preterm delivery, but that's normal with twins. There's no big deal. She tried to deliver normally, didn't happen. So she ended up with a C-section. And in the middle of end of June in 2011, we had little Miriam and little Adam who were born. And me being a twin, of course, that was really exciting for me. So I gave the boy, Adam, David, the name of my twin brother, to remember him by. We spent 3 months getting papers together, getting their documents ready to go back to Chad. And by that time, we got passport, visa, and so we headed back to Chad and started working on this new project. And it was great because I didn't have the full responsibilities of being at a hospital all the time. I was just doing construction mostly, so I could spend a lot of time with my kids. And towards the end of the year, we decided to go to Cameroon to spend some time with some friends of ours who work in a mission hospital there, spend Christmas with them. And after Christmas, we came back to N'Djamena, the capital, and that night, it was December 29, the day before our 7th wedding anniversary, Adam had a fever. Now in Chad, fever means only one thing: malaria. So our friends there at the Mission Guest House had a rapid malaria test. We did the test. It was negative, but I was not convinced. So I gave him the first dose of malaria medication, opened up the Artemisia tablet in his food. He did not like it, but I force-fed him, another one the next morning, and we got in our car and went down to the Barry Adventist Hospital. I said, hey, I want my kids to, they need, I know how kids do not handle pills. They've got to have IV quinine. It's the only treatment for kids under 2. I treated hundreds and hundreds of kids, saved hundreds and hundreds of kids. Of course, I'd lost some, but it always been because treatment was started too late. So I felt very confident, get them in the hands of our excellent nurses, everything will be okay. So we arrived there Friday afternoon, did a malaria smear, and sure enough, Adam had quite a high percentage of malaria, and even Miriam also had malaria. So we put them both on IV drips. They got their first couple of drips right there that afternoon, and then later on that night. And Sarah insisted that that she would sleep in the hospital, and the nurses could come get me if needed, but I should go back home, or it wasn't used for both of us not getting any sleep. So I went back to the guest house there in the hospital, spent the night, and the next morning came up, and Adam and Miriam were playing with each other, and it was such a hassle trying to keep them from tangling up their IVs. They were in their little mosquito tent. And so we prepared to give the next dose of the quinine, and got it all set up, got it running, and then I was talking to Sarah or someone, and then she looked over at Adam and said, "Is he seizing?" And I looked over just in time to see him stop breathing. So again, the medical training kicks in. We started doing CPR, everything. I called in Olin Netteberg, who was the doctor who'd taken over for me, and we worked on him for about an hour, and then Sarah said, let's just stop. And so we stopped, and then it was just the longest day, I think, of my life. Word went out, people started coming that we knew from all over. We had to prepare our own casket. We had to prepare to bury him. There was no morgue, there's no place to keep his body. And so that afternoon, we finally had everything prepared, and we buried him right next to his little sister. And then we went back to Mundu and tried to figure out what was going on. And it's strange how time is great in that it heals things, but it also makes you forget things. So I went back and looked at some of the things I'd written, some of the blogs that I wrote. And I'd just like to read you some of those because it captures, I think, things that I can no longer capture, unfortunately, about what we were feeling. I'm lying flat on my back on the veranda. Dusk has settled. The stars are not out in force yet, but the half moon is up and its bright understar straight overhead. Among the dark tangled branches, a few fruit bats flamp silently across the clearing, temporarily blocking out the moon. Darkness settles in as I feel a gnawing in my gut and the need to release my anguish, but the tears won't come. My mind wanders to a million memories. It's only Monday, but Friday already seems a lifetime ago. I've already started to feel the waves of grief mixed with a calm peace that ebb and flow like the tides of the ocean that Chad has never seen. A few incidents stick out. I'm in the tiny office of the waiting room with Sarah and Miriam. Miriam is halfway through her treatment and has just finished an hour of cooing, flopping, half crawling, and wrapping herself up in her IV tubing. Now she's sleeping, her legs hanging off the edge of the mattress, face down, and slightly turned to the side, away from her left arm, which is encased in tape, an arm board, and an elastic wrap to keep that precious IV going. I hear the sounds of French with an Arabic accent outside. I just want to see James and give him my condolences. He's at the house, replies an unknown informant. Through the broken slats and ragged curtain on the window, I see a couple of Muslim hats on top of well-known faces as they turn to head in the wrong direction. I take the route through the waiting room and from the door yell out, catching the two men's attention. Assalamu alaikum. The two Muslims turn and smiles light at their faces. They give the traditional reply, "Wa alaikum as-salam." One is a contractor who remodeled the Berry Hospital emergency room and built some staff housing. The other is the local imam. The imam is dressed in a light blue robe with embroidery on the chest. He has a white flat-topped hat on his head and a checkered Middle Eastern scarf around his neck. One eye is blind and almost shut, and a scraggly beard graces his chin as a smile crinkles up his lined face. "This is the way of the world," the imam continues in Arabic, after we have shook hands and exchanged the appropriate long greetings. "This is the way of this world. Only Allah knows why these things happen. Only He knows." "Alhamdulillah," I reply. "My heart hurts with your heart," the imam continues, first touching his chest and then moving his hand out pointing at my chest. "My heart grieves with your heart. Only Allah knows why. May Allah be praised." "Mashallah," I intone, my head down as I shake and hold the Muslim leader's outstretched hand. "Where's Sarah?" the imam asks. "Inside, come." We walk back together as both men offer me more words of encouragement and condolences. Inside, I check and find Sarah sleeping. "Don't worry," the imam says with a smile. "Allah will give you more children. This is the way of the world. There is loss. Allah gives, Allah takes away. Let us pray." Both Muslims stand with their hands outstretched to receive Allah's blessings as the imam leads us in a prayer of praise and consecration. When he has finished, we all bring our hands to our faces to accept the blessings from God. That evening, my uncle, a Christian pastor, calls me on the phone, also offering his encouragement and condolences. He also ends with prayer. During the prayer, I realize this is a rare moment. I have been blessed by both Isaac and Ishmael. For an instant, around a tragedy, the two brothers have stopped fighting and helped the hurting. I am moved to tears, which is quite easy these days. There is no meaning in it all, and yet my mind struggles to find some answers and explanations. Of course, they will all fail, but I must try anyway or drown in hopelessness. Maybe that's why I wake up so early and can't sleep. I'm searching for some consolation, for some meaning. My body is tense and needs release, but the tears have dried up until they spring forth at some memory for some unknown reason. I laid Miriam to sleep last night. She is exhausted. She's had malaria, for God's sake. She was swamped by visitors trying to console her parents. She was surrounded by sobbing and wailing and tears. She couldn't sleep in all that. So now we're in a familiar setting. Her crib and mosquito net are unchanged. She has the quiet of her corner. So I lay her down to sleep, to rest in peace. She's unafraid. She knows I'll wake her up in the morning. She knows she's safe. She knows I'll be there. She drifts into silence. She knows nothing of what I'm suffering all through the night as I think of my little boy, pale and cold in that box, surrounded by the damp African soil. But then I think, God has put Adam to sleep, but he knows he'll wake him up in the morning. He knows that he's safe. He knows that one day we'll be reunited. I've stayed home from work this morning. I just don't have the energy to go in. Waking up at 2 to 3 a.m. every morning is taking its toll. I am exhausted, yet I can't sleep. I need a distraction. I open my computer and start watching a movie. I'm partway through the gripping story when Sarah has to leave to run some errands. Miriam is out on the mat on the porch. Check on her every once in a while, would you? She kisses me briefly and heads out the door, winding her headscarf as she goes. I'm intensely interested in the movie and really don't want to leave my distraction, but being there for Miriam is more important. I put the movie on pause and go out to the porch. I'm rewarded by a crooked grin from my favorite little girl. I can always come back to the movie later. Later that night, as I lie in bed next to Sarah and we talk about Adam, I have a flash of insight. All those things I miss about Adam, all those things I miss being able to do with him, is simply put on pause. I will watch him crawl for the first time. I will hear his first words. I will see him grow and develop. I will get to teach him things, just not right now. Adam's story is interesting, but for the sake of more important things, and God only knows exactly what and why, Adam's story has been put on pause. I don't mind watching a TV show or a game I've recorded for years or a movie sequel, yet somehow I think that waiting to enjoy certain moments with those I love and miss is too much. I'm too impatient. Maybe I need to follow my friend, the Imam's advice. Shila sabur, Allah yarfa. Shila sabur. Have patience. God only knows. Have patience. It was such a long process of trying to go through this whole thing, and it is hard to remember exactly what really helped us, but three kind of main things kind of come through. And the first one is a verse that I'd read, I don't know how many times, but never understood, found in Mark 10:29-31. Truly I tell you, Jesus replied, no one who has left home or brothers or sisters or mother or father or children or fields for me and the gospel will fail to receive 100 times more in this life. Homes, brothers, sisters, mothers, children, and fields, and in the age to come, eternal life. And I realized that, because most people were very comforting during that time period, but there's always a few who just feel like they have to, I don't know what, remind you of the fact that if you had not gone to Chad where there's all that malaria, Adam would not be dead. Well, maybe. But as Sarah and I talked about it, we also thought, but how many Chadian children would be dead? And so then we had to decide if how many Chadian children would we have to save before we would consider the loss of our son to be worth it? In other words, put a value onto our son's life. How can you do that? 5, 10, 20, 100? We couldn't do it. So we realized that we knew the risks, but we also knew what would be happening to children in Chad if we were not there. And so we took the risk. And because his life was put on pause, we know that it is only a temporary interruption. So the first thing was reminding ourselves that we had received 100 times more in this life, because we have way over 100 Chadian children who are our children now because we've saved their lives. When you go through a life-threatening situation with someone and you save someone's child's life, there is a bond, and that bond can be eternal. And the second thing is, like I said, we will see him again. His life has been taken from us temporarily, but that's only a temporary separation. 1 Thessalonians 4:13-18. Brothers and sisters, we do not want you to be uninformed about those who sleep in death, so that you do not grieve like the rest of mankind who have no hope. So we grieve, but we don't grieve like those who have no hope, because we have the hope that we will see him again. And then the third thing that really, in retrospect, this didn't help so much in the initial time, but after that, Sarah also said, hey, I want to get pregnant again quick. And so we got pregnant sooner than we probably would have. And we got an amazing little boy named Noah. He is a handful. He is just unbelievably active. The second night of his life, he screamed for 5 straight hours. So they actually called the doctor in on call because they were afraid something was seriously wrong with him. There was nothing wrong with him. He just likes to scream. And he pretty much did that for 3 months straight. But has developed into this wonderful boy. And looking back, we say, yes, we were separated from Adam temporarily, but because of that, we have Noah. And we would not have had Noah otherwise. So again, that gaining more, even though you lose, there are things that you do gain. So I think at this point, I'm more into questions and answers. I've kind of, I think, shared my experience. I'm sure there's plenty of people who experience much worse loss. People in Chad certainly have. Over there, it was nothing new losing a child. Every single person who came up to us and greeted us and wished us their condolences, I could see in their eyes, they knew what I'd been through. Here, maybe if you lose a child, you think, why did this happen to me? Over there, it's, well, why did it take so long? Everybody's lost a child. And that did ease it a little for us, and it bonded us with these people who have suffered so much. They all lost children. And that really was meaningful also in a way to share suffering with people who are suffering and don't have the option of living in a different environment where the loss of a child is abnormal. Over there, unfortunately, it is still normal. Of course, we're working to change that, but change is difficult. So I think at this point to just open it up to any kind of questions that anyone may have.
If you've been with us before, you know that we have 2 microphones on either side of the room for anybody who would like to ask Dr. Appel some questions. I have one. I've heard you 3 times in this building talk. And a question that's just burning on my mind. You've been in Chad for 13 years, and we were talking prior to this program that you're looking at staying there even longer. Why Chad? Of all the places in the world, why Chad?
It was just, it's something I ask myself a lot too. Why Chad? It's kind of a long story, but I mean, where are we at in time? Do I have time? I guess I have plenty of time. Okay, good. I'm going to subject you to another story. So when I was going through residency, I had signed up with Loma Linda University, as I mentioned, to be part of this deferred mission appointee program, loan repayment, 6 years in the mission field, working in a developing world hospital, and it'll pay off your loans. Well, I didn't hear anything more from them throughout my residency, so it started to get worried, and about halfway through, I had been getting some email newsletters from some American doctors working, one in Ethiopia and one in Nigeria, and I just read them and tried to keep myself inspired about maybe what I'd be doing one day. But one day I replied to one of the emails, and then I got a call from Loma Linda University from Dr. Richard Hart, who had founded this organization called Adventist Health International, asking if I would come meet with them. And so I did, and there was the health director for the Seventh-day Adventist Union in Central Africa, which is kind of what coordinates the different hospitals and schools and churches for the Adventist Church in Central Africa. And they talked about this hospital in Nigeria, and they were developing a family practice residency, and were interested in having, obviously, more people, and that was my specialty. Seemed really great opportunity. I was a single, young doctor at the time with no experience, so having experienced physicians, people who could mentor me, and also provide me with a surrogate family sounded like a great idea. But then near the end, then the health director said, and then we have this little hospital in Chad. And I can't explain it except that something just hit me right in the middle of the chest. And it was so obvious to them because they immediately said, both of them in unison, you don't have to decide now. You can take some time out and go check them both out. And so the next year, my final year of residency, I took a month off and I traveled to Nigeria first. I spent 3 weeks there, had an amazing time, learned a ton. And again, logically, it felt like the right place, but something just didn't feel right inside. I'm a doctor, I'm used to analyzing things objectively, but for some reason this just wasn't working this time. It just did not feel right. I'm usually not a person who goes on feelings, but for some reason this was really a very strong one. And so I was getting ready to go to Chad, and I was supposed to leave on a Wednesday morning and get to Chad on Thursday. By the time I navigated the complexities of Cameroon Airlines, I ended up in Chad on Sunday night. And after spending a weekend in Cameroon. And at that point, the car that was supposed to take me down to the hospital was no longer available. So the following day, Monday morning, I got into public transport, crammed in with 20 other people in a tiny minibus. And I should have known there was going to be a serious problem when at 10 o'clock in the morning, to get the thing going, they had everyone get out and push to start the thing. And literally every half an hour, they were stopping to replace some part or tinker with something, hammer on something. And the whole trip was 400 kilometers, which is about 320 miles or something like that. And by 1 o'clock in the morning, we were still only about 2/3 of the way there. And we were all out of the car on the side of the road, and I went to look, and they had the valve cover off, and I was looking straight down into the pistons. I thought, this thing's not going anywhere tonight. So the guy who was accompanying me, the treasurer of the union, of the mission, he flagged down another bus that was already full, explained to them the situation, and they managed to cram us in. So that I was sitting with just half of one cheek on the seat, and another guy was sitting in front of me with his legs wedged in between mine, and I was so packed tight in that I actually could fall asleep sitting up with no problem. We got to the end of the road an hour later and bunked down there for the night on a hard cement floor. I still have no idea where. and the next morning got on motorcycles and went off the pavement to the hospital, crossed the river in dugout canoes because there was no bridge or barge. They just put the motorcycle in the canoe and paddled it across. Got to the hospital, and this was Tuesday now, and my flight from N'Djamena, the capital, left on Wednesday. So I got to spend a few hours at the hospital, and I had to turn around and make the whole thing back again. So I got back to the pavement, got on a bus, and we went, and about 7 o'clock at night, we came to a town that was still about 100 miles from the capital, and they stopped, pulled over to the side of the road, and the driver walked off. And so we said, well, what's happening? He said, oh, there's bandits on the roadhead, so we can't go any further tonight. So we went back into town, we bought a couple of woven mats, locally woven mats, and laid down to sleep, figuring we'd spend the night. And little by little, one by one, the other passengers came over to our mats and laid down next to us. They didn't ask or anything, they just came over and laid down. And so I found myself lying, like this on a mat, staring up at the sky with strangers, complete strangers, lying right next to me. And I remember staring at the sky and just feeling, this is right. So it's strange. I mean, it's probably not the way most people choose to go to a place, but that's how I ended up in Chad.
I know there's probably some other questions here, and so if you have some, please approach one of the two mics in the room. We have a question over here.
I'm not sure which one to ask, but I'm curious about the Ebola. But on the other side, malaria is such a terrible killer in the world. We don't have it here in the United States. But is the WHO do anything in Africa now? I know when we were there, there's some talk, but where is it now?
Do you know why we don't have malaria here? We used to have malaria here until this country decided to create something called the CDC, Centers for Disease Control, with the objective of eradicating malaria. And fortunately, they had a wonderful tool at their disposal that they used to eradicate malaria called DDT. And then as soon as they'd eradicated malaria, then they banned it and said it was evil and bad. So the rest of the world couldn't use it. So what is the WHO doing? Well, at least they've cut back and say, well, at least for malaria control initiatives, you can use DDT. But there's so much political now and economic things that are going against it. Like if the European Union, for example, has such high standards of testing for DDT that even slight traces that are nowhere even close to anyone's level of perceived toxicity will make them keep from importing cotton and other things from these countries. So the countries are afraid to use it because then they won't have any exports and things like that. But there's always things that they're trying to reinvent the wheel, even though over 100 countries have eradicated malaria, all of them using DDT. But now they're trying to come up with vaccines, which won't eradicate it. It'll just keep children from getting cerebral malaria, which is a good thing, but it's not a solution. And they're trying to come up with new treatments, of course, but all the latest and greatest are starting to find resistance now. So we're going back to quinine, again, unfortunately, in many of these places. Mosquito nets, it's good, but it's only good because it brings insecticide into the home, and it's an expensive, more toxic insecticide that doesn't last as long. DDT, you can spray it on a wall just twice a year, and it'll kill mosquitoes that transmit malaria for up to 6 to 8 months, whereas these insecticides wear off in about a month. So you pass out a bunch of mosquito nets, and they don't get malaria for a month. Because no one is sleeping under the mosquito nets when the mosquitoes are biting, because they're biting in the early evening and in the early morning when people are already up and moving around or haven't gone to bed yet. So the mosquito nets don't keep you from being bitten by malaria-carrying mosquitoes, but they bring insecticide into the house. That's why treated nets are the ones that are used. And this is what they've been advocating, but obviously it's not really having any impact because we're trying to reinvent the wheel. So this was kind of something that really made me angry when my son died, is because I knew that because of political maneuvering on the part of the Environmental Protection Agency, which launched itself on banning DDT, that malaria didn't have to exist in this world. And my son didn't have to die. And all those other African kids I'd seen didn't have to die. But because we were worried about some theoretical risk of damage to birds' eggs, which was a theoretical and not a proven risk, in fact, it's found to be false. In fact, DDT has not been found to be harmful to anyone. There's never been a death attributed to DDT, despite the fact that we used to dump it on top of people during typhus epidemics during World War II. Literally take them into rooms, cover them with powder. Anyone who's old enough probably remembers they used to go around with trucks and spray. You see this big fumes of powder going around in city streets and everything to eradicate malaria. And even now in Florida, sometimes malaria pops up again, isolated cases, and they bring out DDT again to eliminate it, but they don't let the rest of the world use it. And they're talking about it again for Zika. So it's only beneficial if it helps us, but as long as it's not helping us or we don't have the need for it, then let's ban it, because it's bad for everyone else. If you think that's my soapbox, you're right. So you brought it up, though. Okay.
In the front of your book, you write, the person who risks nothing, does nothing, has nothing, is nothing. You've risked a lot in the time that you've been in Africa. You were one of the frontline doctors who was there for the Ebola crisis. Could you speak to that for a little bit?
So when Sarah was pregnant with our fourth child, after Noah, we have another son named Isaac. And when she was pregnant with Isaac, it was a surprise. We had all this infertility, and then she gets pregnant the natural way. So it was kind of a surprise. And we were in the States when she told me, when she found out. And so by that point, it was too late for her to travel back to Chad, and she'd already had 2 C-sections, so it didn't make sense anyway. But I still had my ticket, and I felt I needed to go back to Chad to oversee this new project that we were doing. So I went back to Chad, and I was there for a couple weeks. It was in 2014, in July of 2014. And then, of course, Ebola was starting to really get going into July, August. And we have a hospital. The Adventist Health International has a hospital running in Monrovia. And so I got a call from Richard Hart, the same guy who had called me up some years before to tell me about Nigeria and Chad. He called me in Chad, and he said, James, this hospital in Monrovia is one of the only hospitals still open in the capital city. Pretty much every other hospital is shut down because the workers are getting sick with Ebola. And we're not trying to treat Ebola patients, but we're the only hospital that's treating all the other things. We have one doctor there, and she's being really overwhelmed. Can you go? And fortunately, Dr. Hart is very wise, and he had called Sarah the night before and asked her. So she had warned me that he was going to be calling me. So I'd had a little time to think about it. But even then, when I said it, it was quite frightening, I have to admit, because all through my medical training, it was really the one word that kind of scared me, because it's this uncurable, rapidly, drastically, kills you drastically and rapidly disease that's so contagious, and they want me to go in the middle of it. But again, the same kind of principles as with our son. I thought, well, sure, I could go there and die, but if I don't go there, there's some Liberians who will die, and how many now Liberians do I have to save before I feel like my going there would be worth it, even if I died? So then I said, well, if I save one, then it's worth it, because I'm no more valuable than a single Liberian life. And so I decided to go over there, and of course I ended up saving a lot more than just one life, and I was there for 6 weeks. And it was one of the most intense experiences of my life, but also one of the greatest experiences of my life, and has opened a ton of doors for me in many other directions, as well as just, this country knows about fear. I mean, political situation is just trying to promote fear, but we already have this so much fear in everything that we do. In fact, one of the first things that people usually ask us before they come to volunteer and chat is it safe? And I say, is getting on I-4 safe? It's not safe. Nowhere is safe, but you don't have to be afraid. And really, when you boil it down to, if people are afraid, it all boils down to a fear of death. But if you have come to terms with that, and you feel like death is asleep, and you have a future life waiting, and you know that God is just putting you to sleep temporarily, and you know He's going to wake you up in the morning, then you don't have to fear death. And if you don't fear death, then what do you have to fear? Well, I feared Ebola, which was related to death in some way, but mostly related to, I wasn't just worried about myself, I was worried, now I have a pregnant wife who's about to have my third child, I have 2 small children, and so I was afraid of death. I didn't want to die, but at the same time, I knew I had to face my fears or I would always regret it, because, and so there's something you gain when you really face your deepest fear. It frees you up so much. What else can happen to you in life if you've faced your greatest fear and overcome it. So going to Liberia was an amazing experience. Yeah.
View of God changed, if it has, through all these experiences that you've had?
Okay, now you're really going to take up a lot of time. I mean, I don't even know how I can begin to, because my view of God has changed quite drastically. And most of it has been thanks to my wife. And it's been the changing of my view of God, really, that has opened up the doors for me to work with Muslims, to write the books that I've written on Muslims, that has allowed me to deal with the death of my first two children. And I think to still be in Chad, having my view changed about God and what he's about and what he's like. I think I touched on that a little bit. I don't think my view of God was the way it was when I got there, as it could allow me to see that maybe when God allows people to die, that he's like a father. I think to me that captures really how my view of God is now, and it wasn't this way before, is he is like a father. And no one thinks that a father is bad if he puts his children to sleep for the night, knowing he's going to wake them up in the morning. That's not a bad father. Now, if you think God kills people, that sounds bad. But when you put it in that perspective, and the Adventist belief is, I know there's other beliefs on what happens to you after you die, but the Adventist belief is that it's a sleep. So it's our Father putting us to sleep, knowing he's going to wake us up in the morning. And I think, to me, that captures really how my view of God has changed. It's a much bigger picture. He's not this evil guy, because then it explains so many things in the Old Testament. What if all of the people who did not enter the ark and were killed in the flood, what if they were just put to sleep for the night? What if God's going to wake many of them up in the morning? Maybe they weren't all eternally lost. Maybe they were all just put to sleep. What if the firstborn of Egypt, that the angel of the Lord came down and slew all the firstborn of Egypt? Well, that's terrible. This is this massive, this sadistic God who wants to just kill people. Or if he's putting them to sleep, does that mean all the firstborn of Egypt are eternally lost? Or will many of them be woken up in the morning as well? It explains to me just so many other things throughout the Bible that had always been hard for me to understand about God. So I really have my wife to thank for that, and the experiences that I've had in Chad that have forced me to face and try and come to some sense, make some sense out of this whole thing about death and loss. That's very brief. I mean, I could really go a lot deeper than that, obviously.
In Chad, are the mosquito breeding grounds in oasis areas, or are they toward the south of the country where it is more humid?
Yeah, definitely. In the north, the northern part of Chad is all Sahara Desert, so they have no malaria. And even this new hospital building in eastern Chad, since we've moved out there and then to the capital, we haven't had malaria for 2 years now, except the couple of times when I've gone down to Mundu to kind of help out with that project. That's the only time I've gotten malaria in the past 2 years, is those 3 visits. Every time, 2 weeks after I go down there, I get malaria. So there's definitely a change depending on where the mosquitoes have a more favorable breeding ground. So not all of Chad, but then not many people live in the desert either. Most of the people are concentrated in the south.
Yeah, could you compare the medical work in Chad today to what it was when you first got there? And how did you get from where you were at the beginning to where it is now? How did that change come about? What were the steps involved?
Okay. So when I first went to visit that hospital, as I explained, there was about 2 patients in the hospital, and there was no fence around it. There was pigs and chickens running around. The ceilings were falling down. There was no equipment or supplies. And I think it was the involvement of Adventist Health International and then people becoming aware of what was going on, because I started, in order just to survive this extreme circumstance, my daily psychotherapies, I wrote blogs, I wrote email newsletters, I expressed what I've been going through. And so people became aware of what was going on, and so people started coming to visit, bringing supplies, donating money. And then as we started to also care for patients, people in Chad are very desperate for health care. So desperate that they're willing to come all the way across the country to a little rundown little hospital in southern Chad. So And then there was, government strike in 2006 that closed down all the surrounding hospitals, government hospitals, for 6 months. So we were the only hospital for like 4 counties. And so then people really started to come. And then from that time forward, we've either been number 1 or number 2 in the country in number of surgeries done. Not that that's really anything on ours, it just tells you how desperate the situation is there in Chad. And then in 2009, we started noticing from 2007, 8, 9, that a lot of our patients were coming from Mundu, which is Chad's second largest city, about 100 miles away. And they were coming out into the bush to have surgery. So anyway, that led to us going there one time and the church administration showing us a missionary house that had been squatted on by the military for the last 15 years. And they wanted to get it back. They asked, can Adventist Health International do anything with this, like a clinic or something? So I said, well, I'm not really looking for any more work. But that week, the Loma Linda Women's Auxiliary wrote me and said, do you have any projects in Chad? Well, I'm not a project leader, so I didn't, so I just wrote like 2 paragraphs explaining that people are coming for surgery from Mundu. We have this house here, and then next thing I know, we had $75,000. So then I said, well, okay, I guess God wants to do something. Then Florida Hospital got involved. They sent a couple of containers. They gave us some money also, and they actually gave us $40,000 a year for 3 years. And next thing you know, we had a surgery center in Mundu. And then other doctors started coming. After 7 years of working for the church, getting paid on salary, we quit so that more doctors could come. And so a couple more doctors came. They took over in Bere. Sarah and I moved to Mundu, like we mentioned there. And about the same time in 2009 as well, one of our board members of Adventist Health International, a Chadian who was a judge and was a constitutional advisor to the president, said, hey, I'd like you to meet a colleague of mine. He's a Muslim from Eastern Chad. He's a judge as well. He's also actually the vice president of the Supreme Court. And he wants to meet you because he said, we've heard what you Adventists are doing in southern Chad. Would you come out to our part of the world? So I definitely at this point was not looking for something else to do, but I'd like to see that part of the country. So I said, sure, if you want to drive us out there, no problem. Well, the next thing you know, he's giving us the title to a bunch of land out there and saying, this is, he took us out there and said, where do you want to build the hospital? Like, okay, whatever, and this looks good. And then a month later, he gives us the title to the land, so then we're kind of stuck. And but then little by little, God has been bringing other people in to, again, get that going. So, and then the same judge, right before I came back to the States in 2010 or 11 on a trip, I think it was 2010, in March or April. I was staying at his house in the capital right before getting on the plane, and he said, well, we're building this house next door. We were thinking about building it out and renting it to make some money, but my wife says we should just give it to Adventist Health International to do a dental clinic there. It's like, okay, well, believe me, I'm not looking for more to do, but I didn't also want to be someone closing the doors on something. So I went back to the States, got introduced to a guy in Ventura County who is interested in helping people from Ventura County who are interested in humanitarian work. He's not a Christian, but he just is interested in humanitarian work. So I met him, and he said, there's a mission trip down to Mexico. Would you like to go? Sure. I drove my van down there with a couple of guys, including a dentist, told him about Chad. He's a friend of this guy. And long story short, they raised a bunch of money, and now there's a dental clinic open in Jemena with a dentist from Romania who is running it. So all I can say, I've just been sitting back kind of watching what God has been doing and trying to keep out of the way. So when I first got there, there was a hospital that was basically not running, and now there's a hospital that has more than doubled its capacity with 4 physicians working there. And then there's a surgery center, which is the only other hospital in the town of 500,000 people. And there's a dental clinic in the capital, and then there's another hospital in eastern Chad, which will be the second hospital for a population of about 1 million people, that we hope to open sometimes in 2017.
I think we have time for one more question. And Dr. Hernandez, I saw you moving towards the microphone.
I was really struck by the story of the Imam coming over to you, and it seemed like you and them together had some sort of bond. Could you speak a bit about the Muslim-Christian relations? And clearly that's a long topic, but perhaps briefly, it was very moving to hear you articulate the bonds that brought both Christians and, together, you and them. And could you help us understand.
Yeah.
Because in our context, sometimes these
Yeah.
questions are one that brings conflict and suspicion.
I wish you would have asked this question first. I would forget about saying anything about anything else, because to me, this is the most important thing that I've learned over there, is, again, God leading me. I knew I was going to a Muslim country, but I didn't really think about it. But over there, having Muslim patients and things, I became friends with them, saw how godly they were, how well they treated their families, and just started raising a lot of questions in my mind as I started looking into this. And then God brought me into contact with a lot of resources. But I think the key thing that changed my opinion was, I'm not trying to promote my book, I never do that, but the whole story of the children of the East, which is not my idea at all. I heard someone else do it, and I asked, he has since died, and I asked his daughter-in-law, who was in charge of his publication things, could I write a book on this topic? And she gave me permission to. So it's dedicated to Dr. Robert Donnell, who first gave this talk. But the children of the East basically explains that Islam did not start with Muhammad in the 6th century AD. It started with Abraham and Ishmael. And there's actually a story that runs through the Bible, a secondary story. We all know the story of Isaac and Jacob, but there's a parallel story, and it seems like almost every time when Israel strayed away from God, someone from the other sons of Abraham, who kind of all intermarried and became known as the people, the children of the East, came in and worked together with someone from the descendants of Isaac to bring people back to worshiping the true God. All the way up to the birth of Jesus, where you had the wise men from the East, who were Arab traders bringing what they produced, frankincense, gold, and myrrh from Arabia. And then Isaac, represented by the shepherds, coming together to celebrate the birth of the Messiah. And all the way to Revelation. So it starts in Genesis, it goes all the way to Revelation. There's a story, there's a heritage of Islam that starts in the Bible. And then if you start to explore further, and if you've read Islam's holy book, the Quran, then you also see that actually he never came to start a new religion, but to actually call people back to the religion of Abraham. And the basic message of the Quran is worship God, the creator God, the God of all the prophets, and prepare yourself to give an account of your life before God. And if you don't understand that, go read the Bible. That's the basic message of the Quran. And so that just totally has changed my whole, and so then that's kind of why I felt pulled to call it. This hospital we're opening in Eastern Chad is in a 100% Muslim area. Our Muslim friends have invited us out there. We've developed deep relationships out there. And you know, it's exciting because I do feel when I come back here, I feel that over the 13 years, I've felt the tensions really escalate, even much more so than after 9/11. And I think it's sad because I think most people have never lived and talked with Muslims and don't realize that the majority of Muslims, while there are some extremists out there that are giving them a bad name, the majority of Muslims are godly people who are just trying to live their lives, take care of their families, and worship God as they know best. And we have really opportunities to reconcile and have mutual sharing. And I think we can learn from them, and I think we can share with them, and I think it can be a mutually beneficial experience. So I've written 2 books on the topic, The Children of the East, The Spiritual Heritage of Islam in the Bible, and I've also written one called Messiah, the Jesus of the Quran and the Gospels, that also talks about, because Jesus is found in both holy books, and in my opinion, if you are willing to look beyond superficial communication differences and look deeper, that there is no difference between the Jesus in the Quran and in the Bible.
Thank you, Dr. Appel, for a provocative and engaging evening. We do want to remind you that this book is out in the lobby along with a couple copies of the other book that Dr. Williams just mentioned. I'm really grateful for this book because it's the emails from his first 3 years in Chad. And so Dr. Hart from Loma Linda University encouraged him to put this into book form. And I can remember being on the email list and reading the emails and just being amazed at what was going on and the brutal honesty in these emails. And so we have copies of this book in the lobby, and Dr. Appel will be there to sign any copies of the book. You're free to stop by and talk to him. We also want to encourage you again to take the bookmarks that are on your table to make sure that you RSVP, because we're certain that several of these will fill to sellout capacity. And so we want you to have the opportunity to join us for the for the remaining Colloquia events for this school year. So thank you for joining us, and have a good evening.